Hello, welcome to today's Tactica video. This is going to be a little different than many Tactica videos that I've done or will do, because what I want to do is put this in perspective, the personal journey I've had in my bolt action career and how I came to my understanding of my theories, my beliefs, and how, in these tactical concepts here. This is information for you guys to use to make your own decisions about what you think is best for your own armies. They're just like I've said in a lot of different contexts, this is more an art than science. There are scientific principles here, but it is an art. Military war or theory is really an art. And so there's a lot of room for debate. There's a lot of room for different opinions. I wanted to share mine, and hopefully that'll steer you guys in making some of your own decisions as you build your armies. Now, this specifically applies to bolt action, but some of the concepts can apply to other game systems as well. With all the new game systems coming out, it seems there may be more overlap than I'm even aware of, because I'm not keeping up on all the new games. I can barely afford the ones I am playing. Alright, so my journey into bolt action began with my initial attempt to go into the Polish early war, and I'd started on that process, getting some key models, when my attempt to get at the infantry with a good discount fell through, and unfortunately I didn't have enough budget left to go for a full an actual finish out my Polish army. So I was stuck with trying to use what resources I had left to go and take a different approach with my Polish 1st Armor Division, which was something I did want to do. It's just I was going to do it second. The Polish early war miniatures I was going for were metal, so they were more expensive. They're like $25 a box, so that's $50 or so. What I had then, the only thing I had an option available to me really was to buy the British book, Armies of Great Britain book, and a box of the British infantry, with enough left over to buy one extra sprue of commandos, because I wanted the berets, because my division had the black berets, because they were an armor division. So I had only 30 models to really play with. When I got the box, I also noticed that there were only 2 types of helmets, basically split evenly. They were either had Hessian strips or they didn't, and the ones without them either had nets or didn't. But the look was very distinct, and when I looked at pictures, the 10th Dragoons all had no Hessian strips, whereas the 8th Rifles, based on the infantry brigade side of the division, they did use Hessian strips. So in my mind, I didn't want to mix the models, so I was left with a smaller number of models that from that 30 that could actually be a platoon. That's my own issue, idiosyncrasy, if you will. So I looked at the pieces I had and basically decided that I could build the maximum number of model units would be the lieutenant, 3 squads, each with a light machine gun and 2 submachine guns, because I knew eventually I would get the rest of the models, and each NCO would have a submachine gun, the corporal and the lance corporal both. I had a Piat team, and I had a sniper team. And I was able to get one of the Hessian model helmets and put it on my artillery observer, which would have come from the artillery brigade anyway, or attached division battalions. So the Hessian strips didn't really matter there. But that's what I had to start my bolt action model and career with. So not a whole lot. It wasn't very effective, but at least it got me started. So I was getting in on this with a whole bunch of other guys at the same time who were also starting with small armies, so it didn't hurt too bad. But it was a bit before I could add to this. So I started with these 5-man squads, the minimum I could do. And of course, as I researched, my whole intent was to be able to model and represent on the tabletop a historical unit that was using, and you actually used the historical tactics they used. So, of course, what that meant is I was looking at how did the British actually use their squads. And I, of course, learned much as they do nowadays, not just the British but other nationalities, they have a machine gun team and a rifle team. Now, in the British Army at the time, it was a machine gun team of the Bren gunner, his assistant, and a lance corporal. Just 3 men. And the rifle team was the squad leader, section leader, who was a corporal, and 6 riflemen. So, obviously, in bolt action, you can't have a 3-man section in the British book. So, I was left with basically 2 5-man teams if I was thinking in terms of using the 2 halves of the unit. So fortunately, when I did finally get the rest of the models, I stuck with my small team approach, small squad approach, simply moving the submachine gunner out and replace it with a rifleman. Now I've got 2 units, two teams that make up the entire section. I end up with 2 order dice, and in discussing with other people, some people don't like it, some people don't care. But I thought it would be important to walk through the reasons I'm doing it. More than just, well, because I started that way. When you look from a historical perspective at the various countries that were involved in the war, you learn kind of what their small unit tactics really amounted to. And I was actually surprised to find some things I didn't know before. Now, I knew for decades now, I've known that the Germans built their squad around the light machine gun. That was the center of the squad. The rifleman's job was to protect the machine gun. So it was a single squad of 10 plus men who, that's what they would do. They started out with 12, I think, in the beginning of the war. And each squad, each of the light machine gun, which was very, very good, ended up acting as a single unit, a single team. I was surprised to find out the Americans did the same thing. Now, they only had the BAR, but though it had a slower rate of fire and a shorter magazine, because it was only a 20-round clip, it was still, that was their light machine gun, their squad automatic weapon. But they also had a 12-man unit that just operated as a section. Any type of maneuvering they did, or fire support they did, was at the platoon level, really. The British, I found, to my surprise, actually had the 2 teams within the section and used them that way. Typically, the Bren team, 3-men, would take up a position and put fire down on the enemy target, while the rifle team would maneuver around and try to flank them. Or sometimes it would be the other way around. The 7 men of the rifle team would try to literally pin down the target unit, while the Bren got a better shot to get enfilading fire, which would allow them to really decimate the opponent's unit. So here I was pursuing this historical approach in my own personal gaming, and realized that most of my opponents, who were just going with the game, really were fighting very historically with the units they had, large squads in their army instead of the small squads. So I don't feel too bad about taking this minimum squad I'm not doing a min-max thing with my army, even though some people may accuse me of that. And you'll see the reason I can claim that in shortly as I go through the pros and cons here. If you look at this team, it's supposed to be 3 men: the loader, the assistant, basically, the Bren gunner, and the SMG, the NCO, Lance Corporal, and these 2 guys would be part of this team over here. Since I can't do that, I've got 2 5-man teams. I get 2 order dice, like I mentioned before, and I would always use the 2 halves of the squad to try to put 2 pins on my selected target. I usually outnumber my opponent, except Soviets, with order dice simply by this approach. And my style of play for this unit, this 10th Dragoons and my Polish Armor Division, is really about pinning the opponent, limiting their mobility, their ability to respond to me, and then moving in to do whatever I need to do, whether it's taking objectives or trying to whittle down enemy units. Now, the pros to this, like I mentioned, is I get more order dice. That's good. So I'm often more likely to have the first dice. I'll have more dice coming out toward me first, so I have kind of an initiative, and I can respond more quickly than the opponent could potentially. Of course, it's luck. I've had situations where I've outnumbered my opponent and still ended up with the last 8 dice in the bag out of 12. So it can happen. But generally speaking, I'll get the first shot on things. I'll be able to put that pin on a unit that my opponent needs to use and force them to do an order check. Now, granted, if they're veterans, it's not as impactful. But I've had veterans with 1 pin. Because I got that dice early and put that 1 pin on them, I will end up with getting them to fail an order check. And all they need to do is go down, and then I've limited that unit for that turn. That's one of the reasons I take a sniper. I'm not there to kill the opponent. Yes, it's great if I can take out a medium machine gun, or take out the mortar, or take out the lieutenant. But what I'm really there for is to put pins on an enemy unit 2/3 of the time. That's what it's there for. So that's my style of play. Now, another advantage is that the opponent is essentially faced with a large number of targets. Instead of firing on a single unit and applying a pin and having that 1 order die have to take a test and all 10 models affected, he has to decide which of the 2 units he's going to want to shoot. And only half of that set of models is going to actually have an order test to take with the pin on them. The other can act freely. He only has the 1 unit to shoot with. He's got to make a choice. That can often be important, because what I can do then, leaving the machine gun where it is, I can threaten more closely with the rifles, making them more threatening to the opponent, and they'll direct their fire there. I can play the mind games with the opponent. If you've seen any of my other videos in the academy, you'll have heard how you get into your opponent's head and utilize some threat management there. So there's a lot of that flexibility I have. Because I have more units, I have a lot more flexibility. And because I have 2 units separated, if I happen to lose 5 models, I still have another unit there. Matter of fact, if I lose 3, this becomes a small team. I still have these other 5. So my firepower doesn't drop as dramatically if I happen to fail a morale test. Granted, if I had a full team, I'd have to take 5 shots, or 5 models out before I take my first morale test. True. However, you usually only lose 3 or more guys when you're hit by HE. Now, if I'm getting hit by an HE template, I might lose a whole lot more than just 3 guys. It's more likely you're going to lose the 5, especially when you keep your on a cluttered table and you've got to keep your guys closer together just to get in range of your opponent. So there's a mix there. It's easier to take out a squad of 5, yes, especially if you keep them close together with HE. But again, if I were to take a hit with a 3-inch template, it might wipe out a squad in 1 order die. But I don't have to make a morale check on the remaining half of the team because they're in a different unit, right? If they were all part of the same one, I'd have to take a morale test at a 3-inch template, D3 pins. So I could be at 3 pins already, or more if I'd taken pins before that, and I could lose the entire unit just with the 1 shot. So giving me 2 units instead of 1 provides, yes, 2 more fragile units, but the army as a whole becomes more flexible, and I believe becomes a little more resilient. Not necessarily, I'll lose more order dice, yes. So in an order dice game, this may not be a good thing, but generally speaking, I will still be able to maintain my flexibility because I will still have more order dice in the bag, even if one of the units is gone. So that's a very real approach. Now, on the downside, and this is a serious one, if your opponent enjoys close combat, you're going to be at a disadvantage, because even though I usually run these units as veterans from a historical perspective, a small team doesn't do well in a close combat situation. If they're behind cover, yes, you get to go simultaneous, but I'll only have 5 dice to roll. And if I've got my 2 submachine guns, I might be able to roll up to 2 of those hits again and maybe get another 1. But that's still a maximum of, assuming they all hit, and if you're going up against another veteran squad, that's not likely, you're going to end up with 7 potentially. But if a squad comes at you, 8 guys, and they have 2 submachine guns, they could put down 10 hits. They're more likely to take you out than you are to take them out, as far as doing more damage. So your survivability in close combat is really, really low. So that may be a reason to go for a larger team. It's seriously a big difference there. The only time I've been successful with small teams has really been going up against whittled down artillery units. That's really where I've been able to get lucky. I even had one situation to kind of really illustrate the point. I had a squad of 5 untouched veterans, exactly arranged like this, with 2 submachine guns, Bren gun, and a loader, charge into a Soviet inexperienced squad that had already taken 3 models out. So there were 9 models left. Now they were on the other side of a fence, so we did have to go simultaneous, but I was going to kill on 3s. Mathematically speaking, I was going to get 4 kills. He had 9 shots. Mathematically speaking, he was only going to get 3 because I was veteran. Unfortunately for me, I managed to kill exactly 0, and he killed. Oh, it didn't matter. He killed, and so my entire squad. So having more dice to roll is really important when it comes to close combat, because even if you are a vet, you can really miff your rolls. So it's extremely important, I think, if you're into close combat or facing close combat, to go with a larger squad. That's, I think, the biggest drawback of the small squad, in my opinion. Now, to kind of take that point home and to explain how I can say that I'm not really min-maxing here, is I've begun my Carpathian Independent Brigade, which was used in the African desert. The squads there are going to be full-size squads in every game. The reason for that is simply again, I'm taking this from a historical perspective. Even though the British doctrine was to use the 2 teams separately, the terrain within Libya and Egypt didn't really allow them to do that. They were assaulting really over open ground, very little cover, if any at all, while they were on the attack, and they were assaulting positions that were where the enemy was dug in through, sometimes even in actual barricades or emplacements. Not the best position to be in. Now, what is interesting about the Polish Carpathian Independent Brigade was that, unlike the rest of the Polish armed forces that were in exile and fighting for the West, they really favored, maybe not as they enjoyed doing it, but they engaged in close combat a disproportionate number of times. They favored going into the enemy trenches and engaging in close combat, whether it was a night patrol or a full-on assault on the enemy lines. They went in with bayonets very often. In fact, they counterattacked at one point. An entire division was coming at them, and they counterattacked with a bayonet charge because they were still low on ammo after several days of fighting. That was just the way they operated. Now, they didn't really use the fire team tactics. So I'm going to be playing that entire army using full-size squads, and again, trying to engage in close combat as often as possible. So in those, as you start seeing that army show up, you're going to see a different approach on the table. So I put this in front of you guys to give you some ideas to think about when you decide what size your squad should be. Yes, a full-size squad of 10 or 12, depending on your nationality, does get the bonus of being able to re-roll failed morale checks, but you lose some things. You lose your flexibility by having 2 units that can put in a maneuver around each other. You lose the extra potential pin. You lose the extra initiative that you could get by having an extra order die. Little things like that. There is no right or wrong answer. It's about your play style. So give it a shot. Large squad, small squad, intermediate. Find what works best for you. Definitely take advice from others. put your questions up on the forum. What do you guys think? How many guys you might mention having a unit? You'll get a lot of good advice, and pick the answers that fit your playstyle the best. Just make sure it's an informed decision. Don't go with what the majority of people do. Make sure you're evaluating in your head. If you go back to any of my Academy videos, where especially the Sun Tzu series, it talks about the commander has to make intelligent decisions based on the capabilities of his army. One of the biggest capability components is your own decision making, your own playstyle. So I offer that to you guys for thought. Comment below. Let me know what you think. Let others know where you think, where you stand, how you approach things, what your playstyle is, and whether you use large squads or small squads. Everybody has a right answer here. There is no wrong answer. There is, however, a chance to have a mismatch between your approach and what your opponent's doing. That will always be a possibility, regardless of which direction you go. So with that said, I'll leave you guys to enjoy the concepts and mull it through your mind. Let me know if this helped you at all. Go ahead, share, like, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.